everybody. My name is Max Nospish. I'm the Manager of Education and Visitor Experiences here at the First Amendment Museum located in Augusta, Maine. Thank you for joining us for another episode of First Amendment Museum Unscripted. Today, we're talking about college and free speech, college and free expression, anything to do with college students and freedom of speech. So if we want to introduce ourselves in the same order, I'll pass it over to Rachel and Mads.
Okay, hi, I'm Rachel, and I go to the University of South Carolina. I'm a freshman.
I'm Mads, and I go to the University of Maine in Orono, and I'm a junior.
Hi, I'm Miles. I attend Sewanee, the University of the South in Tennessee. I'm a politics major and an art history minor.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Schumann. I'm a senior at the University of New Mexico.
Hi, my name is Jaden. I am a sophomore studying also at the University of New Mexico.
Hi, I'm Rachel, and I'm a junior at the University of New Hampshire.
Hi, I'm Simon. I'm a politics major at Oberlin College.
Okay, great. So the first question I want to ask is, I'm going to kind of put you guys on the spot. I want you to rate your college on its freedom of speech culture, I guess. 10 being like maximum amount of freedom of speech. Everyone feels comfortable sharing their opinions. There's a wonderful, vibrant, diverse community of people all sharing their thoughts and opinions. Everyone feels safe. And then 1 being it's a like authoritarian state where nobody can say whatever they want and everyone's scared to talk, and it's a terrifying place to vocalize your opinion. So on a scale of 1 to 10, where say your college and what would you rate it and why?
I would say for USC, probably a 6, because I think there's a lot of, my college definitely stems more liberal, but at the same time, there's a lot of things like on campus and activities and clubs that really go different ways in different areas. So I think it's pretty open to that topic, but I couldn't say that everything that occurs is something that the university will fund or want to support.
I think I'd go somewhere around a 6 or a 7. And I say that because even though we trend more liberally, obviously Maine is a swing state, but I still think that the administration at UMaine Orono could be doing a little bit of a better job to hear out students' voices more. I think that students have no problem making their voices heard, but I think willingness to actually listen is a different question. But again, if we're just talking about free speech, I think we do pretty well. We do have some union issues right now. Like there's a graduate student union that's recently come together, and I think the administration needs to do a better job of paying attention to efforts like that on our campus. But as far as our student government, I think they do a fantastic job. We recently, even though we're a pretty liberal institution, I think we do a pretty good job, again, on the students' end of hearing out everybody's voices. We have a lot of different political groups on campus that all have sort of been given the same treatment by student government. So.
Yeah, so University of the South in Tennessee, let that sink into the audience for a second. It's pretty liberal, and I personally have a great experience with the amount of freedom of speech that I personally partake in, right? I can go to local bars, I can go to fraternities and sororities because they're not closed off like they are in most other campuses. They're open for the most part to, GDIs. And it's really nice to be able to go in and just have conversations about politics, sociology, psychology, all of these different things. And I personally feel comfortable. Now, on that note, I'm also someone who walks around campus blaring music through a speaker. I go get something to eat at the cafeteria and I'm playing music. A lot of this is because I wish there were more music on my campus, and there's way that of course I could go to faculty members and administration to try to get that changed, but I think it may be more effective on my campus if I do it through alternative means.
So Miles, what would you give Sewanee out of 10?
I would give it a solid 8 for sure.
Okay, cool. All right, Andrew and then Jaden.
Cool. I'm glad that there's another UNM person here. I'm curious to see if our views align or not. I would give UNM a 7 or an 8. Actually, I think that we have a fairly good record of kind of embracing a lot of sort of different viewpoints. I'm the president of College Democrats on campus, and we're able to host events. But so is Turning Point USA. We have people tabling outside, everything from Radical Feminist Book Society to local ministries. So I think that we have a fairly good free expression culture on campus. Although as someone who studies labor history, I would be remiss if I, like Mads, did not shout out the graduate union here, the Graduate Workers Union, which I do think needs to be listened to a bit more. But outside of that, I would say that there's a fairly healthy free speech culture here.
I too am glad that there's a fellow UNM student. I would agree that UNM has a fairly decent track record. I would also rate UNM at an 8. I think that in terms of the university allowing different peoples to express their opinions, I think they have done a fairly good job of that. Again, as Andrew just pointed out, there have been opportunities for both liberal and conservative speakers that is frequent on our campus. We've actually made the news, national news, for when Tommy Lahren came to the University of New Mexico to speak. And I think we have in terms of UNM allowing speech from both sides, I think it's pretty good.
At the University of New Hampshire, I would say that we are probably a 7 or 8, because we are still a college campus and a university, but New Hampshire state motto is live free or die. So that's definitely like a pervasive culture here, which is a good thing, I would say.
So I'd probably rate Oberlin College 6 or 7. As probably know, Oberlin College is historically incredibly liberal. And I think that definitely shows in the dialogue that takes place on campus. The reason I give it around a 6 or 7 is because I think at times it's hard to, for some people to be able to express their views because of the atmosphere being incredibly liberal. But I believe that when everyone is respectful in the dialogue that they partake in, there end up being really good experiences for people having open and candid conversations with each other.
Great. So none of you guys gave your schools a 10. Seems we're in the 6 to 8 range. So what are some of the things that are restricting, or maybe why are college, okay, let me think of a better way to phrase this. What are some things that college students are afraid of in terms of freedom of speech? Like, why is it not a 10? What is happening on campus that's making it not a 10? And this is open the floor to anybody. It doesn't have to be in a certain order. So why isn't your school 10? So go ahead, Miles.
I think for me, at least, Sewanee University is a private institution. So, we don't get public funding like, public colleges and universities. One thing that I think about frequently, though, is my money, or say my money, but the tuition that I've paid and grants and scholarships and all sort from me and other students are all being supplemented or funded by the government. Right. So at the end of the day, any government restrictions on anything, it doesn't just have to be speech, could be implemented through our school and the vise of, oh, well, we're following regulation, widespread government regulation. Something that comes into mind heavily, for example, is I think it's Morse v. Frederick. It's a Supreme Court case, bong hits for Jesus. And essentially things like that is what keeps my school, at least, from getting a 10 in my eyes.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar, Morse v. Frederick's the Supreme Court case where the student in Alaska brought the Bong Hits for Jesus banner to a off-campus event and then was silenced by his teacher for it, and the Supreme Court upheld the teacher's right to punish the student for off-campus speech. Okay, so anybody else? What are people afraid of at your school? Why is it not a 10?
I just want to say, I think that on an institutional level, I think that UNM is fairly good about setting a good free speech culture. Again, I think that the graduate workers union needs to be recognized and respected a bit more. But I've observed through my time at UNM a reactionary impulse from the left-wing students, which I would say that we have a fairly liberal campus, and most of our students are on the left. There's something of a reactionary impulse to kind of shut down speech that's out of line with their views. And as Jaden alluded to earlier, we drew sort of national attention for the protests that we had around our campus when Charlie Kirk came to speak, when Tommy Lauren came to speak. And I think that the sort of rambunctious protests, not only kind of in principle are bad, as they're sort of, you should, the opposition should be more speech, not less of it, but also tactically, as it gives those reactionary figures kind of a larger platform to stand on.
I think that USC is kind of the same thing with, especially with like when the major public figures come nearby. Like I think maybe like 2 months ago or something, Trump came to speak at the South Carolina State House, which is like right in the middle of the campus. And so there was a lot of protests and things like that, whereas there were hardly any supporters, at least from this USC like majority, I feel like, and it received mostly negative press on campus. I noticed that. So I feel as though if there had been some kind of support or anything like that, it was definitely very limited and kind of shut down, which is one of the things I think that one of the reasons why I think that it wouldn't get a 10, because there's a lot of like with how the school reports news, it's very much biased.
So at Oberlin College, this has been in the news, Gibson v. Oberlin College. That case really, I think, dealt a blow to student speech on campus, not just our campus, but campuses all over. And now I think our college has done a good job of not getting hit too hard by that, but still, because it happened here, it seems to have made it harder for students to use school resources in order to facilitate their freedom of expression, because it could leave the college liable to litigation. So that is part of the reason my answer was a 6.
So this is less pertinent specifically to University of Maine, but I just kind of wanted to bounce off of the topic that we're focusing on, which is like student responses and protests to controversial figures showing up on college campuses. And I, for one, am actually a supporter of protesting controversial figures if you don't agree with them. But I think that students need to understand that there's a difference between protesting and professing like your disagreement with a figure's ideas and calling for the administration to kick them off your campus. I think those are two very different things. I'm like, I don't know, I guess I would be supportive. I don't know, I'm trying to think of the specific case that I'm thinking of. I think there was a figure who is it was a big embarrassment, I think, to Columbia. There was somebody who was booted out and then invited back because there were so many different protests about him being on the campus. I can't remember the specific example, sorry.
By my rating of an 8 in the previous round of questions, I think that overall UNM as an institution does not prevent necessarily controversial public speakers from coming to the campus. I am not as familiar with the situation relating to the graduate student union, so I'm just not even going to address that. I'm going to let Andrew talk on that because that's something he has knowledge on. In terms of the university actually allowing for public speakers to come to the campus, I think we do a great job. However, I will say, to echo what a lot of people have been saying, UNM is certainly a left-leaning campus, and when it comes to a controversial figure, many students are very quick to attempt to protest and even shut down the protest, which is, of course, their First Amendment right. Another thing that kind of is a little less good from the university does relate to the Daily Lobo, which is run by students and not the actual university. I recognize that my time is up, so I'll get on to that later.
Yeah, we'll hold on to that. So I want to ask you guys, if you had to craft your campus's free speech policy, is there anywhere you would draw the line, and where would you draw that line? Is there anybody you'd be like, yeah, we're not going to have that on our campus? And where would that line be? Would some people not be allowed to speak or come to the campus to, pass out flyers, maybe print something, whatever? Or would it be a free for all in your perfect world? And again, I open this floor to anybody. Where would you draw that line on speech? We'll go Rachel L. I saw your hand first, Simon, and Andrew.
So I feel like, in my personal opinion, I think as long as there isn't like major false information, like life-threatening false information, like anything related to COVID, I would say, or any kind of violence, I think most information is okay to be spread and exercise your First Amendment right. But when you said this question, I immediately thought of how last semester there was like a booth that was on campus, and they were talking about how they were trying to like tell students that the moon landing was fake, and that was like completely sponsored by the university. So I would definitely cut out things like that, just like basic parts of history that are just very false, I would say.
Interesting. So no moon landing denial at University of South Carolina with Rachel in charge. So Simon, what about you?
Ideally, I think free speech is unfettered, but I think college campuses, because they are places of learning, there need to be restrictions such as hateful speech, misinformation, as Rachel is saying, and also any speech that is likely to incite some kind of disturbance of the peace, or if it's fighting words, stuff that goes back to stuff like Cohen v. California, like that there has to be some kind of limit on that. But I think educational institutions should try to facilitate the maximum amount of free speech possible, because that is what learning is for, and that's how you learn.
Cool. So I am reticent to enable the administration, or in larger scale the government, to come down against free speech, because I think if you look historically, speech laws have been levied against progressive groups trying to push against what Orwell called the all-encompassing orthodoxy. That said, if I were to be drafting a free speech policy, I think that what would be excluded from that is speech that is demonstrably socially deleterious to the welfare of the students. So speech that is inciting violence, for example. I would also say speech that endangers public health. So misinformation around COVID, for example, would be part of that. And groups that are out and out fascist, groups that are advocating for the extermination of certain groups. I don't think that the continued existence of certain people should be a topic of debate.
Yeah, so kind of just bouncing off of what Andrew and Rachel L. were kind of talking about. Here at Swanee, I mean, I go around where there are buildings and places that are named. There's a grave of ex-Confederate soldiers and generals right on campus. I walk by it all the time, So the idea of like, oh, well, we shouldn't have Nazis, or we shouldn't have hate speech, or we shouldn't have obscene speech. What are those, right? And honestly, more so, I think that not having the opposition is kind of a weak way out, right? I think by having this discourse, by having, the KKK and, Nazi regimes being able to voice their opinion, it makes it easier for people on the other side, or on our side rather, to be able to poke flaws in their arguments, to be able to show the hypocrisies and the evilness of their intent. So here at Swanee, I would simply just try to do my best to limit speech that is has the least amount of information or facts backing it, and speech that would directly incite harm to groups or individual people.
So
For
are
example, like promoting guns.
moon-landing denialists allowed at Swanee in your?
Yeah, for sure. 100%
Okay.
allowed at Swanee.
All right, go Mads and then Rachel D.
So I definitely agree with Miles about advocating for like hateful groups or groups that we might not necessarily agree with to sort of put their views out of the shadows, bring them into the light, so that it's, I don't know, it's a lot easier to like disprove things like logically when you've gotten somebody like hard committed to their ideas. So I definitely agree with you on that. I think that an idea that I'd love to draw attention to is discrimination of ideas on college campuses. I think this is something that groups like TPUSA and a lot of different political student groups are paying attention to right now. Like with TPUSA's, they have like a blacklist of professors who discriminate against conservative students or conservative viewpoints in their classes. And that's actually not expressly illegal. But I think that's an issue that is really present on college campuses today, is discrimination of ideas, and specifically like ideas promoting misinformation, that sort of thing. And I'd love to bring that specifically into the conversation, hear some people's ideas about that.
All right, Rachel D, University of New Hampshire, live free or die. What's the call? Let's bring these ideas out of the shower, as Mads would say.
Yeah, I would say that I agree with bits and pieces of what everyone has stated. And I would say that if I were drafting the free speech policy, I would say, like, as far as we could go with it would be, I think, a good thing. I would say generally the things that are not protected should stay unprotected. So if we're talking about incitement, obviously a lot of forms of obscenity, I think that that makes sense. And I would say that particularly at my university, it's not very big. And so we don't often run into these situations. But for example, we've had a group that comes every day that, I mean, UNH is public property. So we have religious groups come all the time to speak. And I mean, they get the reactions they get, so.
This is an incredibly difficult question for me because, first of all, I think that a lot of questions relating to free speech really are a case-by-case basis. That being said, while I am extremely morally against so much of like this misinformation, of hate speech, of outright like just like bigoted speech, I think that it actually should not be prevented. I don't think that it should be censored. I personally believe that when we actually allow it, we encourage the students to start paying more attention to these issues, and we encourage them to be politically active. When we allow these sort of like when we allow these speakers to come to campus, we show our students that these groups exist in the world, and that we should be doing something about it. It enables the students to protest and show resounding support for these marginalized groups that are being targeted by speakers. It shows them that they have a community to support them, and it teaches them about these issues, because I think that is one of the most important things.
So let's go there, since we've all mentioned them. Let's say you find out the Nazis are going to do a speech on your campus green. I don't know, what is it called? The quad or whatever, you find out in the public area, the Nazis, and let's say they're the most extreme Nazis you can imagine. It's like Hitler 2.0, and they don't have any, well, they don't feel like they're going to censor any of the things they're going to say. They're not going to, downplay anything they believe. They're going to say the most hateful, bigoted, messed up stuff. And they want to do this speech. How would you react? Would you ignore them? Would you go? Would you protest? Would you try to shut them down? What would your reaction be? Let's go Miles and then Rachel D.
First off, again, I completely see this being a possibility at the University of the South in Swanee, Tennessee, where buildings are named after ex-Confederate generals and supporters. But I digress. If this were to happen at the Quad, I really do feel like me, along with many of my fellow students and even faculty members, would, come out to protest, to let people know and be aware that our campus isn't necessarily in a line with those views, even though we're allowing them to come and have this conversation. In some ways, even allowing that conversation on a place like Swanee could show more progress than anything. Would I be terrified? Of course, because if these are the most extreme, who knows? Like I could get lost in the crowd or something. But I know for sure that I will be saying, my voice and my piece before I get lost.
So just to clarify, would you like scream and shout during their talk, or would you wait till after the debate and try to confront them with debate and logic, or would you have a sign?
I would definitely have a sign, probably just saying like something along the lines of education and knowledge being more important than most things. But I would have short conversations with people in the crowd to kind of get the mindset and view of the crowd, and any open question or dialogue that they would be having, I would jump in, take the opportunity to try to make someone's just look really dumb.
Nice. Okay, so yeah. Rachel D, you had a response to this question?
Yeah, I would say that I would support them showing up, but I equally support the fact that a lot of people would probably show up to protest that. And I think that like it's important that we let the conversation happen and let that kind of conversation naturally evolve the way it will. Like I wouldn't be surprised if that extremist group showed up, they tried to say their piece, and I wouldn't be surprised if no one wanted to hear it. But that's up to the student body to decide how they're going to treat that. And I don't think that they necessarily should be shut down before they say their piece. That being said, the students have their prerogative if they want to listen to it or not. But I think that those groups having the ability to say what they want to say is important. And it's equally important that the other side of it knows that they can say what they want in response, and then let that conversation evolve the way it will.
So I just want to start off with, I don't necessarily see this happening at UMaine, and not for any particularly virtuous reason on their part. I just feel like we, as a university, kind of avoid problematic speakers on our campus, which I'm personally against. I think their presence and the facilitation of that dialogue is really important. And I think that we're kind of like a pretty liberal circle. So there's the danger of us getting caught in our own echo chamber here at UMO. So I think we need to be aware of these groups, even if they're fringe in our particular community. But I don't know, this is kind of like a problematic premise for me, because if we are considering that they're like the ultimate Nazis, right, this is not necessarily protected speech, you know what I mean? So it's kind of a more emotional premise. So I don't know what specifically I'd do if these people did in fact come to my campus and it wasn't the sort of protective speech that I support on college campuses.
So I think if a incredibly extremist and fascist group came to try to speak on Oakland's campus, I think it would be shut down before it started. And I would agree with that decision, because I think there's a difference between allowing a diversity of views and allowing hateful, bigoted, racist, anti-Semitic speech. College campuses are a place, in my opinion, for respectful dialogue to take place, and for that diversity of views to be shared and kind of opened up to, like, kind of saying marketplace of ideas. Like, I think that it should exist on college campuses, but I think there is also a balance of making college campuses a safe space for that to happen. And when you have speech that is aimed at violence and disturbing the peace, that fabric falls apart, and that kind of dialogue cannot exist in that space.
So let's draw it back a dial. Jaden, I'll have you answer this question first, Jaden, because it's similar. What if it's not a hardcore, most extremist Nazi ever? What if it's a really polite, really respectful, really nice, hardcore COVID denier who's spreading a lot of misinformation and disinformation? Nothing that he's saying is true, but he's very polite and respectful about it. So Jada, do you have any thoughts on what would you do with that guy? and then we'll go Rachel and L and Rachel D.
Sure. So I think, again, the importance is in analyzing an individual situation. I think it's incredibly difficult to try and make broad assumptions. To backtrack, I know you didn't want me to answer this. To backtrack, I think it depends on what the specific situation is. Is this a group like the Charlottesville rally that's going to come to campus and parade through? Then I would have to say no, because the potential for violence is just too extreme in that situation. However, if it's an individual speaker who is actually coming, then it's different, because then you can there isn't necessarily as great of a risk of just like clash between a bunch of groups of neo-Nazis and students. But I think security is very important. We cannot let this spiral out of control. So security is a very important factor. And depending on the content of the speech, even if it's going to lead to imminent violence, then it has to be a no.
Okay, Rachel L, take me to the really nice misinformation COVID guy. And then Rachel D, you're up.
I would kind of say the same thing as Jaden. Like, I think one speaker, if they're really polite, I think it depends also like on the place that they're speaking. Like if they're speaking outside where everyone walking to their class can see, I think people can just put in their AirPods and kind of ignore it. But I think a lot of the speaker is going to attract people that want to hear and want to have their opinions validated anyways. So if you do have the speaker come and the people that show up are going to be those people that actually agree with this man or woman, and so I feel like a potential for some kind of controversy or violence or some kind of protest and support. I'm not sure if protest can be in support, but you know what I mean. But yeah.
I would say that in that specific instance, let him talk, even if it's objectively not true. I think that is the beauty of free speech, and that as people, we have the ability to reason. And I think that if somebody came to my campus and was saying blatantly things that were blatantly not true, I have my own reason and judgment, and I can determine whether that's something I choose to accept. And I think that most people on a college campus, I would say most people in general, we're all on an equal playing field and are able to use our own reason, and we're rational.
So for me, if this speaker was sponsored by the college was paying them to be here, I personally would be against it, because I wouldn't feel good about the college spending money to bring someone in who is promoting bad information. Sure, that exists in the real world, but for a college to invite someone to the campus, an educational institution, to disseminate false views, I do not see that as being conducive to the learning environment. It's obviously protected by free speech, and if someone just walks onto the college campus, stands on a box, and spouts about COVID denial, I do not have a problem with that. But as a school-sponsored event, I would be very much against it.
Cool. So I, for the past couple minutes here, I've been trying to square how this meshes with my sort of opening statement on this. And I think that while sort of engaging in a dialectic is a desirable thing generally, I think we need to be careful from falling into what Karl Popper called the paradox of tolerance. And that we're so tolerant, we tolerate intolerance, and that poisons the entire discourse. So in the case of the COVID denier, I don't think that allowing him actually enables or strengthens or benefits in any way the free exchange of ideas, because their ideas are fundamentally anti-empirical, anti-science, and they're not receptive to facts. And the same could be said of the Nazi, that they're not interested in engaging in a dialectic. They're interested in stochastic terrorism. And to that end, I think that I would be against both of those being allowed, because they're both antithetical to the exchange of fair and free ideas and free discourse.
I was just going to say, I definitely agree with Simon on this one. I think there's a big difference between a COVID denier or really anybody spouting misinformation being endorsed by the university actively and paid to come and speak on campus. And there's a difference between them being allowed to speak on campus. And we actually had an example of this recently in our MLK Junior Plaza. We had a COVID denier speaking, not endorsed by campus, but just sort of individually on of his own accord. And I definitely say I would support that. But at the same time, he would still have to like adhere to our COVID policies, if that makes sense, which kind of inherently undermines his own ideas that he's trying to express. So
Well, let me, so do you guys, when I was in college, there were people on campus always that like were anti-abortion and would have like really crazy like anti-abortion imagery and signs, and then or even there was always preachers outside the football stadium like during game day like yelling like everyone's going to hell, like you guys are all like sinners. Raise your hand if you have that a variation of this on your college campus. Jaden, do you have that at University of Mexico? I'm just okay. So
Yes.
what do you guys do when you see that? Simon, you don't have that at Oberlin? You know, there's none of those people on campus. I guess it's private.
Not
so you can-
particularly.
Yeah.
Private university, small town.
Yeah, yeah.
So-
So okay, so
I would love
so-
to address this point if I can.
Go ahead, Jaden. And then I just want to hear
I-
what do you guys do when you see those people in the real world? Like, what do you do?
I am totally in favor of allowing that to happen on campus. First of all, for clear, but first let me backtrack to the other question about the COVID denier because they actually relates. When it comes to a COVID denier, speaking as in the UNM elevating, giving them a platform in the auditorium or something like that, I would say no, because it is spouting lies that will lead to, that would actually threaten life. So I have no problem with preventing it because it is elevating a speaker whose speech is going to cost lives. It's different from just being controversial. That relates to this in the sense that if they're just out and about, like walking, talking to individual people, I would have no problem with allowing it because it forces the students to actually think for themselves, engage with someone if they want to. However, I'm personally of the opinion, don't engage. The people that show up to campus like this are doing it because they want to draw an audience. They're doing it because they're disgruntled, sad people who have nothing better to do, so they go to UNM, so they go to campuses and try and draw an audience. If no audience showed up, then they wouldn't bother going. They're fishing for a response. Every time someone protests these individual speakers who no one actually agrees with, we're just helping them out by giving them an audience.
So I have to agree with you in part, Jaden, and then disagree with you in others. I feel like elevating someone in an auditorium, yeah, I mean, to an extent that does give them a little bit more, what's the word, like presence, right? It gives them a little bit more magnitas. For example, like we're all from colleges and universities, but who's to say we're on the dean's list? Who's to say we all make straight A's? The audience right now is getting a perception of us based on the platform that we're on right now. But with that in mind, you know, I think that these people aren't doing it just to get a reaction. Yes, that is a goal for sure, and it may be a big one. But I feel like there are a lot of people out there, a lot of preachers and ministers and you know, anti-abortionists who have strong feelings and like who are actually like 100% behind their beliefs. And I'm proud to say that my first year at Sewanee back in 2017, I actually experienced something like this. And I was one of the first people. I was like, who is this guy with this sign talking about masturbation is evil, and if you're pregnant in college, you're going to go to hell or whatever, this, that, and the other. And a group did come by. A lot of people were asking questions and, you know, making a big scene. But I think the best part of it was whenever two of my soon-to-be friends at the point went and grabbed the Bible and started arguing with these preachers using religious text. Because at that point, that's whenever you started seeing the crowd slowly start to disperse because the knowledge was being given out. And I think that's the goal of these things is regardless if you're trying to get clout or whatever. It's about, you know, getting that knowledge out there and having people want to know more, you know, like having to increase that drive. Yeah.
So Jaden, I want to give you, if you want, an opportunity to respond, just because I think
I would
that
love
would
to.
So okay, you have 1 minute, go. And then Rachel will Rachel D will go to you, I promise.
So the figures that I'm talking about are like the preachers and like the people like the Sister Cindy's. She's came to UNM. A bunch of similar people like her come to UNM. These are people who just show up, go walking around campus with inflammatory signs and yell a bunch of crazy shit. Very few people actually agree with what they're saying. These people that I'm referring to are so extreme in their views that even like the most conservative people don't actually agree with them because they're just ridiculous views. Anytime someone goes and talks with them, you just give them what they're wanting. You just give them attention. So this doesn't relate to whether campuses should allow it. This relates to how we as individuals should respond. In my opinion, if you want to actually talk with them, sure, that's your right, but recognize that you're only giving them what they want. If you just ignore them, then these people won't show up to campus. These people show up to campuses because they know they can get a reaction. It can make them famous. If we ignore it, we stop the spread of misinformation. So that's just personal thing to do.
So I just want to point out that we have
policy.
two people arguing for different responses to unpopular speech, you know, and they both are reasonable. Jaden says just ignore it. Miles says engage it, you know, put it out there at the spotlight, and you know, what is that the phrase, like sunlight is the best disinfectant or whatever. You know, get it out there and destroy it with facts and logic, to quote Ben Shapiro. And so let's go Rachel D. Go ahead.
Well, I have two things to say. So one, about the prior example, if it is in regards to a school sponsored speaker, a COVID denier, I would say that logically doesn't make sense and wouldn't be a good thing for the university. But when it comes to people that just like to show up on campus and say what their opinions are, or try to get a message out there, I would say I think most everyone would agree that that is fine, and people can choose to engage with it or not. And in regards to religious groups, we have a religious group that comes every single day and is there for like hours every day, like clockwork, trying to, you know, preach to students. And as much as they bother me, as much as I'm a religious person and I have my own beliefs, I see other religious groups that bother me, but ultimately, I think that it creates some sort of conversation, and I think that that's important. And I would say as long as, and UNH in particular, we don't very often have school-sponsored speakers. So I think that for me, it's hard in this conversation because it sounds like a lot of you do, and I actually find that very interesting. And I would say it's hard for me in this conversation because I never have these situations, so.
Okay, so I thought what happened in my school was extreme, but after hearing about your schools, most definitely not. Most people at my school talking about any of this kind of stuff about abortion or anything controversial in general about religion are usually very silent. So, and even when I think the most thing I've ever heard is when like a guy on a stool on a street, like with a speaker saying an abortion was like a sin and all of this stuff. So, but even then, everyone in my school just kind of walked by and ignored. So I guess I agree with Jaden. What he was saying was just ignore everything. But also, we've never had any like sponsored speakers like that, anyways. So I think I kind of agree with the ignoring aspect of it because I feel like that works better. We haven't really had any of that because most people just ignore the people that do that.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask kind of like a meme question, but I just want to don't immediately dismiss it as dumb. But is cancel culture a problem amongst people your age? I'm gonna leave it at that. That's my question. Simon, your hand shot up. Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, I think it can be a problem. I think utilized in the correct way, sure, it can be a tool to quickly and productively dismiss information that is false or that is hateful speech, but I also think it is usually used as a tool to I guess, strike down anything that you might not agree with. And I think it is pervasive on college campuses. And I think it is a problem because people tend to then be less likely to share their views, whether that be around campus or in classes. And I think, I don't know if it's the school's responsibility to try to make this less pervasive, but I do think it is a problem on college campuses.
I just want to ask a sort of clarifying question by what specifically you mean by cancel culture, because it can be interpreted in so many different ways.
Cancel culture. However you define that. It's one of those things that people throw around all the time. They're always accusing, people roughly our age of engaging in cancel culture. So is this a true claim, or are you arguing that's so overly broad it's a dumb thing to say? Go ahead.
I don't know. I definitely think it really depends what you mean by cancel culture, because you could be talking about like not engaging with something, just putting it out of the public sphere of dialogue, or it could be like overwhelming, sort of like the marketplace of ideas with so many negative takes about a certain topic. It could be either of those two things, which are kind of opposites. So it really depends on what you mean by cancel culture.
Mads, have you ever canceled someone? Never? Anybody ever canceled someone here? Anybody partaken in a cancellation?
I jokingly canceled my friend on twitter.com one time, but
Okay, sure. Yeah. Okay. Miles, go ahead.
Yeah, this is a funny question because like cancel culture, wokeness, I view them as similar things, but I think historians are going to look at it in a very interesting way, because I noticed that my dad's generation and those generations, whenever this whole thing first started, right, I was getting accused of like being woke and having all of these ideologies. Then a year or two later, all of a sudden, my dad and other people around his age are using like, oh, these guys, they're being part of that cancel culture. So it's very interesting seeing these terms at one point used to describe me and my generation in a negative light. But then, after some time to actually mull it over and think about it, get more information on why people are using this terminology and what actually cancel culture and wokeness is, how people in those generations realized, oh, maybe I was too hasty to call you these things and to make these references.
Yeah, we
I
won't
think
even
overall,
we won't even get into wokeness. We're gonna leave that one for another. Well, let's go to Rachel D. Go ahead.
I feel like it's a hard question to answer, but I think that cancel culture in general has been increasing over time. That being said, it's hard because it depends on how we define it. Like when I think of cancel culture, my mind doesn't necessarily go to like people arbitrarily getting ostracized for very like trivial things. Like very often I think that people that get canceled are people that are in the public eye that are really messed up big time. I think when there is this general trend culturally to say, oh, these are the ideas that we don't want to hear about, and if someone expresses them, we're going to shun them. Yeah, I would say that that's cancel culture in a bad way, but I guess I don't have a fear of it, if that makes sense.
Not afraid of being canceled. So, Andrew, go ahead.
So the discourse on cancel culture I find interesting for two reasons. One, it seems the crowd that is most concerned with cancel culture is also concerned with free speech and is sort of trying to bolster free speech. Yet I would assume that social ostracization of bad ideas is preferable to government interference and government censorship of those ideas. And second, I think that the real cancel culture is not being done by college students, wanting a relatively decent space to live in. The real cancel culture is politicians around the country banning books and banning, gender studies and Africana studies. That is what is being canceled, and that is the cancel culture we should be concerned with.
So I just want to say, I think an important element of this, Maine is a pretty centrist state, right? So I think even though my community is pretty liberal because we're sort of like a hub around the university, but whatever, it's not really important. I'm doing research right now with a local school district, sort of around ideas in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and sort of like how teachers are trained on this subject. And I think that cancel culture, while not specifically named by the interviewees I'm going through, is really prominent on all of the data that I'm looking for. I'm like overlooking like qualitative interview data with students and teachers. And I think a lot of people are really scared to say the wrong thing, so they just don't talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion at all. They're so afraid of saying the wrong thing and being called out for it or being canceled for it, that they just like, even if they have the vocab they need to talk about like LGBTQ issues, like race issues, that sort of thing, they don't want to talk about it because they're so afraid of being like called out or saying the wrong thing, even if their intentions are right.
I think cancel culture certainly happens, and I think there are instances where like it can be really used beneficially when someone has done something that society in general kind of just agrees is repugnant. But I think it has certainly strayed into a free-for-all where it just happens for anything and everything, and it happens by both liberals and conservatives. Cancel culture is not something that is unique to liberals canceling conservatives. As Andrew pointed out, it is also very much present among the conservative elites who will be quick to ban our books. I'd say that in terms of like individuals on college campuses, cancel culture is something that is more of liberals against conservatives just because they tend to dominate conservatives in sheer numbers. However, when it comes to like society as a whole, and there certainly are many instances of the conservative elites canceling as well. So it's an issue on both sides.
I wanted to just kind of add to what Andrew said. I completely agree with what he said. It kind of reminded me of this time around this time last year where there was a book in South Carolina. It was just detailing like LGBT issues, and it had a lot of images of like intersex anatomy, and it got banned because it was too explicit. And so I just kind of want to say that when you ban books like that, it's mainly just, I think that's the true problem with cancel culture, is when you ban things that are just informational and people who want to learn more about themselves. So I agree with Andrew on that.
Sorry, I was muted. So the stereotype of the college student today in the 2020s is a liberal snowflake, melts at the melts at the slightest heat or pressure, can't handle the real stresses of the world. Is there truth to that, or is that totally false? Anybody, go ahead. Andrew, Andrew, Miles, and then Jaden.
I think that it's interesting. Our generation, for our whole lives, our parents said, go to college, go to college, go to college. And then, we go to college and we actually hear from people with different experiences and different worldviews, and we come away a more enlightened person. And suddenly our parents don't like that very much.
Where were you raised, Andrew? Which town were you raised in, and which state?
I was raised in Rio Rancho, New Mexico, and my mom is very liberal, so this isn't my case. But I do think when most parents ask their kids, how's college going, the answer should be not well for you, But my point being that I think that the stereotype of college students as liberal snowflakes is a propagandistic media portrayal to dismiss the voices of young people in electoral politics. It's a way of saying, well, they just want to, they don't want to hear anything, when in reality, those in power don't want to hear from us. They don't want to hear their children being more socially conscious and socially responsible than they are being.
Who did I say? Miles and then Jaden. And then Miles, tell us where you grew up so we know which town, which state. Then go.
I grew up in Waller, Texas. It's a small town right outside of Harris County, or Houston, Texas. So I'm a long way from home. But I kind of want to just agree with Andrew. There's a lot of different things, especially whenever a student is going out of state for university. you're not able to go to your childhood home all the time or at all. So, you know, that's a whole different experience. So to say that, you know, these children or these kids are snowflakes is definitely far-fetched. But more so, I think there's something more sinister behind it, right? I think just like with the cancel culture term, the term snowflake is used to hide or to dilute a larger problem all across campuses, and that problem is um, it's the complete opposite, right? Like we see these kids coming into college as, oh, they're innocent and, you know, they don't know any better. Yeah, they don't, but that doesn't mean that they can't make mistakes, and more so that they can't make mistakes that affect other people's lives and learning environment. We need to make sure that our environment is safe for everyone to speak in, but you know, no underage drinking, no physical or sexual assault misconducts. I think we really need to focus on that, and less so about whether or not you know, a kid is going to be upset about having a arts class or X, Y, and Z snowflake thing, right?
So let's go, Jaden, and then Mads. I saw your hand. So Jaden, tell us where you're from, where you grew up, and then tell us you can respond to being a liberal.
Albuquerque area, New Mexico. There are certainly instances, yes, of that very stereotypical liberal snowflake. However, that being said, I largely agree with what Andrew said, that it's sort of just a dismissal term to, instead of actually addressing what these individuals are saying, it's easier just to categorize it and dismiss it because you don't have to deal with it. There are liberal snowflakes and there are conservative snowflakes. Snowflake is generally a term used for liberals. However, former President Donald Trump is arguably the biggest snowflake of them all. He's the type of person who would start a Twitter war with a teenage girl just because it has popular ideas and is making a name for herself. So I mainly just want to use what I'm saying right here to just explain that snowflake is not something that's just reserved for liberals. Yes, there are liberal snowflakes, but there are also conservative snowflakes too. Like former President Donald Trump, probably the best example of that. I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Who's the girl that he argued with?
Oh, Greta Thunberg.
Oh, right, duh. Oh, dumb. Okay. Go ahead, Matt.
But like that, I could think of a million different examples.
Sure,
He's like the snowflake in chief. My point is that snowflake is something that you could classify both liberals and conservatives among, but in general, it's just used as a dismissal term, like Andrew said.
Yeah,
that's
Matt,
former snowflake in chief.
Yeah, former snowflake in chief. So, Mads, go ahead, tell us where you're
Still
from.
snowflake in chief, just former president.
You guys are so real for that. I just want to attack this as sort of like the epitome of a liberal snowflake. I'm a queer AFAB person who's a liberal arts major, so you can take what I'm saying. Assigned female at birth.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so you can take what I'm saying with whatever grain of salt you want. But I definitely think we need to look at college as a time in general of changing worldviews. I don't know anyone from any generation who started college as the same person they were when they left. So I don't know, if you want to call us snowflakes, it doesn't really make much sense because we're one of the most versatile like age ranges that I can think of. But I also think we need to look at these terms as what they are, like cancel culture, snowflakes. These are rhetorical techniques. Like as the vocab themselves, they're rhetorical techniques, but also cancel culture itself is a rhetorical technique. Just deplatforming someone, that's a rhetorical technique. It's, I guess, if you look at it like that, it gives it a little less validity.
Yeah, I think everyone.
Sorry. Before you go, Simon, I don't mean to interrupt.
Yeah,
Matt, tell us where you grew up, so we know where the liberal snowflakes are coming from. And then Simon, tell us where you grew up, and then go ahead.
So we're everywhere. We're pervasive. Because I don't know. I grew up in a lot of different places. My family moved around a lot, but mostly the East Coast. I don't know. I'm
pick one. Go. Gun to your head.
I don't know. Maybe Buffalo, New York, I guess.
Okay, Buffalo, New York. Okay. Simon, go ahead.
I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I agree with a lot of what everyone says about snowflake being a term used to dismiss college students' views. I think it is not a very productive term to be used like to call out anyone. I think it's a way to kind of attack someone's character for the views that they present. College is a time where you are trying to figure yourself out and you're trying to figure out your views and you're developing that framework. You're developing who you are as a person. And then when Snowflake is used to try to call out college students for not being able to back up their views, I think that's disingenuous, because the point of college is to start developing that. And even if you can't support your views, doesn't mean they aren't valid. Some people are better at debating than others. Like it's a really problematic term in my opinion.
And are you a good debater?
Maybe, kind of.
Kind of. Okay. So Rachel, and then Rachel D, I'm coming for you last. All right, Rachel L, tell us where you're from. Go ahead, and then go ahead.
I'm from Lexington, South Carolina, so that's like 15 minutes from Columbia. So I'm basically in the same place where I grew up. But I was gonna kind of add to, I guess, what everyone said, is that when you call someone like a liberal snowflake, you're basically just kind of trying to strip them of their actual role in society, I feel like. I mean, I feel like you should be empowering these young people to become more educated and to understand what's going on in politics and just your state. I mean, people wonder why there's such low like young voter turnouts. I mean, it's because you're dismissing young people, saying that, oh, well, you're in college, you are still taking like random classes. I mean, whereas like you haven't like entered the real world, so to say. So I think when you're really doing that, you're dismissing the power of young people's voices in America.
Yeah, I guess I won't speak to whether or not liberal snowflakes exist, but I will say that it's definitely I agree with everyone when we say that people that use that type of rhetoric are often trying to delegitimize someone's argument or debate. I would say that I think a problem with our culture now is that I think a lot of people equate your political ideology with what type of person you are, and if you are an upstanding citizen or not. And I think that I hope that as a new generation that we can promote and enable free speech, so that hopefully we can resolve our differences and realize that if a lot of people are voting Democrat or Republican, it doesn't really make a difference in what our country looks like, because those are just political parties. I think that it's important that we have these type of conversations that are healthy. And yeah.
And where did you grow up?
Groton, Massachusetts.
And have you ever called someone a liberal snowflake?
Never?
Not
in a real way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap things up with our hot seat. This is gonna be a speed run. I'm gonna ask you questions. Everyone's gonna answer. You have 20 seconds to answer, so make it quick. We're gonna go Rachel in the order we started with: Rachel L, Mads, Miles, Andrew, Jaden, Rachel D, and Simon. I'm going around my screen here. So starting with Rachel L, I'm getting my timer ready. Tell me, what's a news source you trust and why?
Really on the spot. I always trust anything that I see from like the Guardian or New York Times. I don't know why, but every source that I've read, even if it's just like an opinion, I always like how I like the opinion articles. But yeah, I don't know. I can't think of anything else right now.
All right, Mads Howarth, go ahead.
Again, this is very liberal snowflake of me, but I love the Atlantic. I think it's got some of the most impressive writers and a digital publishing. So
I really like Reuters. I also like the Atlantic, but I'm more of a visual guy, so I'm watching a lot of MSNBC, CNN from time to time. But yeah.
NPR and PBS for sure. I think without the profit motive, government and public news are able to be a lot better and higher tier journalism.
Also love NPR, grew up on it, but Washington Post, New York Times, Reuters, Bloomberg, take your pick. And I think
go ahead.
most news sources can be good as long as you stay away from the opinion pieces.
Ooh, calling you out, Rachel L. Okay.
I am
Rachel.
calling you out, Rachel. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Rachel D.
I would say BBC because it's not American.
I think I'm going to echo a lot of what other people said. I like NPR. I like Washington Post, Guardian, BBC, New York Times.
So none of you guys like Breitbart, InfoWars, nothing like that? Jaden?
I heard InfoWars is interesting.
Favorite, love it.
Okay. All right. Okay, so are you positive? Are you what's the word? Optimistic or pessimistic about the future of our country and why? 20 seconds. Rachel L, go.
Oh my gosh. So I would probably say pessimistic because I think I'm just a pessimist in general, but I just think that we're just so divided that it's hard to really have anyone come together on any issue, whether it's not even controversial or not. So
What's an issue you think everyone can come together on?
well, I want to say the environment, but it's really not. So there's no
All right,
real
Mads. Optimistic, pessimistic, why?
I don't know. That's a pretty big question, actually, but I definitely think I'm more of an optimist about the future, even though I'm more of a pessimist as a person in general. But I think it's very radical to be optimistic about our country's political future right now. But I think it's also very necessary, especially for people our age going into political science. I think it's really important for us to have some sort of remnant of optimism.
All right, Miles, go ahead.
Plot twist, I'm an artistic. So I think that humans are too complex and unruly to really stress myself about having an opinion one way or the other about our future. But I will say that we are very adaptive. So I like an artwork piece of artwork, if someone makes a mistake, who's to say that they can't turn it into something beautiful?
I like that. All right, Andrew.
I'm a stubborn optimist. I think that in the past 20 years, class consciousness has gotten a lot stronger, particularly with our generation. I think our generation is also starting to see through a lot of the propaganda that the political establishment throws out. I think most Americans are united on important issues like universal health care, like a greater welfare net, and we fundamentally share a class interest. 70% of the country lives paycheck to paycheck. We're going to be the ones to change the world.
All right, Jaden.
I so want to be optimistic, and I am optimistic that we can get through it, but I'm not going to be blind to the fact that we are facing so many issues on a wide range of topics. Just for starters, in terms of mere democracy, the United States has recently been in a democratic backsliding, and it is very scary. And I'm not saying we can't get through it, but we have to be conscientious that we are actually facing real issues. January 6th was very close to something I never thought would even happen. So we can't just be blindly faith. We can't just show blind faith in the existing institutions.
Right. Rachel D, and then Simon.
I would say that I lean more towards optimistic, but I do think that a lot of changes can be made institutionally and structurally to support like the progress that people want to see.
Simon.
As someone who has done a lot of work about polarization, I am a bit pessimistic. Our legislative bodies are very dysfunctional. There is no compromise anymore. Also, we don't really have a good electoral system with the winner take all, leaves a lot of people unrepresented. So I would say I am more on the pessimistic side.
Okay, last question. Biggest challenge facing America right now. What are you most concerned about? Going Rachel. You know what, Rachel? We'll let you off the hook. Simon, we're going to do a reverse. So we're going to go Simon, Rachel D, Jaden, Andrew, Miles, Matt, and then we'll end with you, Rachel. All right, Simon, go ahead.
So I guess going back to my previous point, I think polarization is the biggest issue that we are facing as a country right now. I think, as Andrew said, we do agree on a multitude of issues as Americans. However, the ones that we don't agree on are being increasingly divisive in our elections. And I think there's an increasing amount of people who are single issue voters and who just vote with party instead of with politics of candidates.
I would agree. I would say that polarization is the biggest problem facing our country, and I'm not going to put it so eloquently, but I think that it's definitely an issue that most young people don't trust their political institutions, and because of that polarization, it's becoming hard to engage with it.
Democratic backsliding, as you might have been able to guess, declining faith in our institutions, voter suppression. You can extrapolate the rest.
All good or all bad? Andrew.
Bar none, class stratification and economic inequality is the greatest challenge facing America. All other forms of social inequality emerge out of class inequality, and political polarization and the lack of political power emerges out of corporations being able to use their dollars unregulated. So to combat that, we need greater corporate regulation and greater unionization among the workforce.
Could you repeat the question one more time for me?
What do you think is what was the question? What do you think is the greatest challenge facing America? The thing you're most concerned about, I guess?
Oh gosh, I hope I don't get any flack for this, but I still wholeheartedly believe that America's core problem is hypocrisies that it's faced since its inception. And one of its deepest hypocrisies, of course, is racial issues. I think if you can combat that, everything else becomes easier. Free speech, what obscenity is, all the things that we've been discussing gets easier if you divide the racial and sexual lines in America.
So not to touch on anything that's already been spoken about, but mine is definitely very specific. I think the unchecked power of the Supreme Court is a major issue in America today, and I think that we definitely need to put more focus on its applications and implications for the future of the United States, like which really pertains to all of these issues that you guys have kind of talked about.
And Rachel L.
I would say the loss of faith in a lot of the institutions that kind of hold our country together. Like I know they mentioned Supreme Court with like the Roe v. Wade like draft leak, and there's also I think Clarence Thomas, the controversy right now with him accepting gifts. And I think a lot of topics with like the presidency and then just the polarization in the legislative bodies.
So great, thank you. Oh, Jaden, final thought.
Maxwell, I'd like to put you on the hot seat. I hope that's okay.
Okay.
And since this is a free speech conference, I hope you don't mind me being a little critical of you.
Go ahead, please. What's the question you're asking? Okay, go ahead.
I would like to ask you, what was your process for selecting people to participate in this conference?
What a question, Jaden.
Yeah, no. Okay, so I emailed. So my goal was to get a wide group of people from all around America. That was my goal. And so I emailed, oh my gosh, I couldn't even tell you how many schools. I basically had this like copy and paste email I was just sending out to every freaking school I could think of. And I was trying to do a lot of state schools with a good mixture of private schools. I was trying to reach out to like the most liberal school, like Mount Holyoke College. I literally Googled most liberal school, and then I Googled most conservative school, Hillsdale College. I like Ivy Leagues. I emailed all of them, Alaska, Hawaii, and then your guys' professors are just the actual rock stars, and so you guys are the only ones that actually responded. So I'm talking, you would not believe the list of schools that I reached out to. So as I wrap things up, I want to really thank not only you guys but also your professors, and I think it speaks to University of South Carolina, University of Maine, Sewanee, University of New Mexico, University of New Hampshire, and Oberlin's College that they're fostering students that are willing to do this, because I reached out to countless schools and got no response. So except for you guys. So
well, I applaud you for your efforts. That is very admirable. That sounds like a lot of work. That is very
emailing.
The determination is laudable. And again, also, yes, shout out to Professor Michael Roca in the political science department at UNM. Yes, incredible.
Super helpful.
It seems like you tried to cover, or like tried your best to get a wide variety of opinions. Unfortunately, it seems like that wasn't the most successful, to no fault of your own.
Again, I applaud you guys for being brave enough to take this on, especially when it's just like a random email and you don't know what you're getting yourself into. Because again, there were a lot of people who I reached out to that just for whatever reason didn't want to do it. I'm not implying anything, but they just didn't want to do it.
So instead of my criticism to you, I applaud you for your efforts.
Thank you.
And I hope that
appreciate
somehow we can find a way of getting a more diverse panel, because I would be shocked if any one of the members on this panel are conservative. And if they are conservative, I'd have to say that they're some of the most liberal conservatives I've ever met based on how they responded to these questions. And I think this discussion could have gone a lot differently had we had a conservative voice.
If
Yeah,
you
but
believe
I-
in horseshoe theory, I'm basically a conservative. So if you want to go with that.
Wow.
It's funny
did
that you
not
say
at the
that, 'cause
start of what you said.
That's funny that you say that, because I am, I think, the only conservative on this panel. So
Rachel,
Maybe that's why you talked the least, because you could see that we were all mostly.
Rachel,
everyone
did you
was-
feel were you nervous to speak? Did you feel like you couldn't speak because of the overwhelming ideological was majority on the panel? You can be honest.
yeah, I would say I was very nervous going into it, and was probably nervous the entire time consistently, but mostly because this is an issue on both sides, is that the label conservative or liberal has way too many implications and does not represent somebody's true like beliefs, ideology, X, Y, and Z. But everyone has been very nice, and I think that I think that just goes to show that, like, I might be the only politically conservative in the panel, but we all generally have the same ideas. So I think that speaks to a bigger thing culturally.
I just wanted to thank my professor again for giving me this opportunity, Andrea Hatcher at the University of the South. And also wanted to plug a YouTube channel, not YouTube channel, but look up Swanee, the rise and fall of Swanee Speaker Guy. It's kind of a meme video, but you know, freedom of speech is great. And I encourage you guys and anyone else at y'all's campuses to put on a speaker in your backpack, walk around campus, play music, different types of music, country, rap, J-pop, K-pop, play it. Just have fun with it.
Miles, I'm gonna have to disagree with you there. I'm gonna have to use my freedom of speech to say no. I had all right, Matt, go ahead.
I just want to say I empathize with the difficulty in finding people to actually respond to your emails out of the blue. So I definitely understand there's a little bit of response bias and stuff like this. People who want their opinions heard the most are obviously going to hear or going to reply to your email. So I also want to shout out my professor, Mark Brewer, for suggesting me to get involved in this. I'm really happy that I had this opportunity provided me. It was really nice meeting all of you guys and hearing your thoughts.